I've tested every single iPad that's out on the market, and this is what I think is actually worth your money in 2025. So here's the truth about the iPad lineup. It is not a one size fits all. I really wish it was, so I could just give you a blanket answer of which one you need, but it is going to really vary based on your use case scenario, based on your budget, based on your size preference, based on your portability preference. And I'm gonna break it down because I have had experience with all of these iPads and their predecessors for years, and I use iPads all the time, and I could probably tell you what you could stand to save some money on and when you might need to spend a little bit more. My idea here is to walk you through the pros and cons of each model so you can make a decision for yourself. And I'm gonna base that on the value and the price point so you don't waste money on features that you don't need. Let's start from the most affordable option and work our way out. Starting at $349, the iPad 11th generation is the most affordable in the lineup, and I do think it is a great buy and a great deal for the casual user. Let's start with the pros. This gives you like 90% of what you're gonna get on the other iPads at a much more affordable price point. So this is a great way to get into iPads and see if you like them. This is packaged very similarly to the other iPads. It looks really modern and beautiful and sleek. It's lightweight, it's portable, it's easy to bring around. You get access to Apple Pencils if you wanna use that. So it's a great way to start digital planning, digital art. Anything that you would think of doing on an iPad, you could probably do on the base model version of the iPad. And for the price point, it's a great way to get into it. The cost of entry is way lower. So if you needed something to just start using iPads, and if you wanted to use this to also maybe stream some content, take some video calls, you could definitely do it on the base model of the iPad. But of course, we do need to talk about the cons. For one, you don't have Apple Intelligence. And I will say that's probably the most glaring difference between this and the other iPads. And it is kind of a bummer. So if you wanted to use Genmoji or Image Playground or any of the Apple Intelligence features that have rolled out recently, or you want to use any of those going forward, this is not the iPad for you. I think it is an issue with the chip. I think the chip is not as high performance as the other iPads. And of course that makes sense at the price point, but it is kind of a bummer. So if those are features that you wanted to use, this might not be the one for you. The other thing I have to mention is the Apple Pencil situation, which is kind of a bummer as well. You have two options for Apple Pencils here. You can go for the USB-C Apple Pencil or the Generation 1 Apple Pencil. Neither of these, in my opinion, are perfect. The USB-C Apple Pencil is great. It's actually a little bit less expensive than the other Apple Pencils, but it doesn't have pressure sensitivity, so it's not what I'm recommending for artists. What does pressure sensitivity mean? That means if you want any variation in your strokes, so if you're an artist and you use a paintbrush, for instance, when you draw lighter, you're gonna have a thinner stroke, and when you push down harder, you're gonna have a thicker stroke. You're able to do that with a lot of the Apple Pencils, but not with the USB-C Apple Pencil. So the way I put it is, if you want to just use a ballpoint pencil, if you wouldn't use anything but a ballpoint pencil, then go for the USB-C Apple Pencil. If you wanna dabble in any sort of art, then I would recommend going with the Generation 1. The problem with this one though, is that it is old school. This is the first Apple Pencil that ever came out, and it still has a lightning adapter. And all of the new iPads do not have that adapter at the base. So you have to use like a little dongle situation to charge this and to pair it, which is kind of a bummer. And a lot of people have an issue with it. I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world, but if you do, that's something to keep in mind. One little nitpicky thing that I have to say about the base model iPad is this does not have a laminated display, even in the newest version of the base model iPad. And it does make sense for the price, but there is a little bit of gapping. I don't think you would notice it if you've never used an iPad before, but if you've used one of the more high-end versions of the iPad and then you're using this, you are probably going to notice a little bit of gapping between the Apple Pencil and your screen because there is a little bit of a gap there. And it is something that I notice as someone who writes and draws a lot, so I have to mention it. Do I think everyone's going to notice it? No, but it's just one of the cons that I'm going to mention. But despite its limitations, I still recommend this guy all the time because for the price, I think it still cannot be beat. In my opinion, this is the best iPad if you're just getting started with an iPad, if you need your very first iPad, if you're not sure how much you're going to use iPads, I recommend this one all the time. This is what I started with myself, and you can really get a lot done on the basic iPad. And for under $500, this is great, and it's the only option under $500. So especially if you wanted to go with something and get accessories, and you wanted to do it all under a certain amount of money, this is the one I recommend a lot of the time, and I do think the size is great too. Next up is the iPad Mini 7 coming in at $499. This is low-key one of my favorite iPads in the lineup, but of course you have to like the portable size. It's significantly smaller than the other iPads in the lineup, but to me, that is a pro. I fit this into most of my purses. This is so great for travel and to use on the go. I think it's so versatile. I can use this to read, I can use it to draw, I could use it to write in my planner, I could use it to access Apple Intelligence, and I have access to the Apple Pencil Pro now, which is one of my very, very, very favorite accessories ever, and I can do that all in a very small footprint that will fit in the vast majority of my bags, which is such an important factor for me because I'm using an iPad more if I have it with me, and this makes it so easy to carry around. The pros to me on this one are, of course, the power and the pro level features that you're getting on this small iPad. You have access to Apple Intelligence that I love so much, and you have access to the Apple Pencil Pro, which is my favorite upgrade that I have ever seen on an iPad. You get new features on the Apple Pencil Pro that weren't on the other Apple Pencils, like squeeze and barrel roll, and especially if you're someone who wants to use your Apple Pencil for art purposes, I think you're gonna find this comes in really handy. And I just think this is a great option. I will say the only con that I have for the iPad mini is that you really have to like the size. If you are someone who is bothered by a small screen size, you're going to be seriously bothered by this because it is really rather small. And if I were to even compare this to my phone, it is only marginally larger than my cell phone. I have the Pro Max, but still, and I also think for some people that might be redundant. So if you already have a phone and you wanted something because you wanted a bigger screen, you're not going to notice this is a significantly larger screen than your cell phone. To me, again, that's a pro, but to a lot of people, that's going to be a con. You have to really like this size, and if you're going to buy this, I would recommend going in and seeing it in person first. Now let's talk about the iPad Air, and this is where things start to feel very, very pro level, and the differences between options here feel smaller and smaller than ever, and every year I say that more and more, and this is no different. It comes in two sizes, just like the Pro. You've got an 11-inch and a 13-inch. The 11-inch starts at $599. The 13-inch starts at $799. I will say your size preference is entirely up to you. I would recommend going in and looking at them. For me, as someone who sometimes commutes, the 11-inch was great for commuting, and now that I'm more at a specific spot all the time, I like the 13-inch for the screen real estate. Let's talk about the pros on this. Of course, you have your two sizes. You've got your M3 chip, so this is a very high performance device. It also has Apple Intelligence, just like the other ones. You have access to Apple Pencil Pro, which you know how I feel about that. I think that's great. It also comes in colors. So this is the blue, but it also comes in a purple, it comes in Starlight, and it comes in a gray, I believe. And the Pros do not come in colors. So if you wanted something with a little bit more personality, you're gonna have to go for the Airs or one of the other iPads that we've already talked about. But if you wanted like a 13-inch size, but you wanted to pick a color, you have to go for the Air, if that makes sense. You also have access to Magic Keyboards, which is great at the iPad Air level, but I will say they're not the same Magic Keyboard anymore. They are very, very similar. I will say the difference between the Pro Magic Keyboard and the Air Magic Keyboard are very, very marginal. It's really more like an aesthetic thing, especially since they updated the Magic Keyboard very recently and it now has a function row, and the price even is not a significant difference. So I wouldn't go one or the other based on accessories because you basically have access to all the same accessories as the Pro level iPad with the Air. If you are a moderate to heavy user of the iPad, maybe you're upgrading from an older version of the iPad base model, I would recommend the Air, and I do recommend the Air all of the time because there is nothing I can do on the Pro that I can't do on the Air, and you have access to so many of those features for a fraction of the price, and I do think this is very, very, very Pro level, and it will work for many years to come. Pro tip, I also think the M2 version of the iPad Air, which was last year's version, is very good as well, and you'd probably be able to find a deal on it. So if you're looking for something that's very, very Pro level that you're going to like and you're going to use for many years to come, but you don't want to spend as much money as the Pro, you probably don't have to, and you could probably go for the Air. And finally, we have to talk about the iPad Pro. This is the most premium and, in my opinion, the most beautiful of the iPads. It's super thin, it's gorgeous, but there are some pros and cons here that we have to discuss as well. This, of course, comes in two sizes as well, your 11-inch and your 13-inch. Your 11-inch starts at $999 and your 13-inch starts at $1299. There is a big difference here, though, that I will say that should be factored into your price. This starts at 256 gigabytes versus all of the other starting points have been at 128 gigabytes. So definitely keep that in mind when you are making your purchasing choices. This also has an option to go up to 2 terabytes versus the Air only has the option to go up to 1 terabyte. So another thing to keep in mind when you are making your purchasing decisions and you are looking at upgrading storage. The iPad Pro runs on the M4 chip. This is like laptop quality of an iPad. So you are gonna notice that there is never gonna be a performance issue with the iPad Pro. It is truly, truly beautiful, but do you need to spend that price point to get what you want? That is entirely up to you. Do I notice a huge performance difference between my iPad Pro and my iPad Air? To be so honest with you, especially with the M3, not so much anymore, especially for just like normal iPad tasks like digital art and digital note taking. I'm not noticing a huge difference between these, but if you're doing something like 4K video editing or you're doing something like 3D modeling, maybe you do notice the difference. And if you do, will you weigh in the comments? Because I barely ever hear that perspective, and I would love to know if the performance makes a huge difference. I actually don't think that that's the biggest selling point of the iPad Pro. I think the biggest selling point for an iPad Pro for most consumers like myself is the display. And I will say the Pro has a really beautiful display. This is a tandem OLED display and it is beautiful and crisp. It is also the only iPad with ProMotion, which is that 120 hertz refresh rate. And I know that's gonna bother a lot of people, but that is only available on the Pro. So if that's important to you, you have to go for the Pro. And I will say it is absolutely beautiful. And I think you're going to notice that as soon as you look at it. The iPad Pro is also the only iPad with an option to add nano texture. So if you are someone who works in a very bright environment and having an anti-glare screen is really important to you, you have to look at the Pro. But I will say that upgrade is only available for the 1 or 2 terabyte. So this is a very premium add-on. You're looking at least $16.99 to start with if you want an iPad Pro with nano texture. It might be really valuable to you if you're someone who works outside. But for me, even though I kind of want to try the nano texture, that seems like an astronomical amount of money to spend on an iPad, so I didn't. But it is something to keep in mind if that's important to you. The bottom line for this one is I think most people are going for the iPad Pro for the display versus the functionality. Correct me if I'm wrong, correct me if you're different, but I will say that's even why I bought mine. So just something to keep in mind. If you want to save a little bit of money, you can do almost everything that you're doing on your iPad Pro on the iPad Air, and I would just not be a good reviewer if I didn't tell you that. So that brings me to my final recommendations. If you're buying your first iPad or if you're on a budget, I would recommend the iPad 11th generation or the iPad mini 7. The mini 7, of course, is going to have better performance than your 11th generation, but it does come at a slightly increased cost. And they are, of course, different sizes, so it totally depends on your preferences and your needs, but both of these are really great buys. If you're a student, a creative, or you want to take digital notes, I'm gonna recommend getting the iPad mini or the iPad Air. These are really great for pretty much everything you want to use an iPad for, and I would totally pick based on your screen size preference, because in my opinion, the iPad mini is basically an iPad Air as well, and that is kind of my thought on it. If you want to use the very most out of an iPad, you're gonna be able to use pretty much every app that you would on the Pro, on the mini, and on both of the new Airs, and I would even recommend the M2 iPad Airs as well if you can find them for a good price. And of course, if you want the absolute best of the best, go for the iPad Pro. You're not going to not like that beautiful tandem OLED display, I will say, but I will say make sure you are an iPad girly to your core so you don't regret spending that much money on an iPad. If this is your first iPad or even your second iPad, I'm not going to recommend going for like the big boy iPad Pro unless you know you're someone who uses an iPad Pro all of the time, and that is just coming from experience. I hear all the time people spending too much money on an iPad. They probably could have gone for a lesser one based on their use case scenario, and that's why they regret the purchase versus learning how to use their iPads. And I will say that has brought me to the end of the video. Let me know if this was helpful or what iPad you're getting, because I'm always curious to know what iPads people get. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you are new to iPads, I have tons and tons of videos about iPads. It's one of the things I do here, so please feel free to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!